so we are going to get started on the NISAW Grassroots Webcast, and we have a lineup of 4 speakers, and then we're going to have a panel discussion. I am Chuck Bargeron, Chair of the National Association of Exotic Pest Plant Councils, and I'm going to be kind of doing the moderation today along with Chris Serversoff-King, who is with the Nature Conservancy and the Florida Invasive Species Partnership. And so we're going to start off with kind of an overview of where we have come since last year when we had this webcast last year, and how this year's webcast is going to address the issues that were kind of brought up through a survey from last year, and then we'll go into our speakers. So, Chris?
So I'm going to give a quick introduction to the technology again for those of you who are on the webcast and those of you who are in the room. Just so you know, we have 66 people who are attending this conference at this webcast at this point throughout the nation. How many? 111. Oh, I'm sorry, 111 people. So those of you who are on the web outnumber those of us who are in the room. Just so in case you have any competitive streaks out there, thank you very much for showing such a great web presence. So, and we also have a question out there to those of you who are on the web asking how many of you attended this webcast last year. And so under the participant panel, under your name, you have an option of clicking, and you can say yes and no and different options. And now it's going to be coming from my computer. So you'll see other questions coming from Christina Serversoff-King, even though, if you need to know this, David Moorhead is monitoring that. And I'm going to go on to...
Well, and another point for everybody out there, this webinar is being recorded and will be available probably sometime next week on the NISAW website.
Thank you. All right. So we did do this last year, and there's a number of us that collectively have come together, pretty much all involved with one or another exotic pest plant council in the United States, and under the umbrella of the National Exotic Pest Plant Council, trying to figure out ways to communicate about SISMAs and CWMAs and PRISMs. And so last year we did this, and we also sent out a survey, and we sent this survey out in the summer of 2011 to all of the people who had participated in the webcast last year, as well as just other people. And we had about 100 people respond to that survey, and so we thank you very much for that. And we're just going to go through 4 quick slides to tell you what we got out of that and why we're here again today. So first, what we did realize is that people who are involved in cooperative weed management areas, cooperative invasive species management areas, partnerships for regional invasive species management, or whatever you want to call them, are pretty well networked within their region. So that was nice to know. We also felt like we got pretty good response nationally. So we had grouped this within geographic regions for response. And you'll see we got, of the 96 people that responded to this, we were pretty well represented across the nation, or at least had some representation across the nation. We also asked everybody if they would be interested in having sort of this, a webinar like this, not just during NISAW, but any other time during the year. And if they were interested, how often? And basically we heard from you guys that twice a year is enough. And again, we had a pretty good response on that with 79 of about the 100 people responding. The other thing we asked you is if we were going to coordinate a national webinar, what would you want to talk about? And that's, I'm being told to pause. If we could cue the music at this moment. Was everybody seeing those slides? Okay. So I'm going to back up for a second. And for whoever raised the alarm to David to tell us that you weren't seeing our slides, here, stay right there, Chuck. Don't go forward. I'm just going to quickly go through this again. So this slide that nobody saw but I talked about shows that you're networked well regionally. This slide shows that we got good response across the nation. This slide says that, yes, you thought a national type of communication twice a year would be fun. And here's what you thought you would want to talk about if we did get together twice a year. And we had a whole list, and I'm not showing you this all right now, but you can see the full results are posted at the National EPSI website, so you can go and look. There was about, I don't know, somewhere between 15 and 20 questions. So there's a lot more information about what's going on with CWMAs throughout the nation than what I'm showing you today. And so those top 3 discussions was, how do you have a paid coordinator for one of these partnerships? How can we use these partnerships for early detection rapid response networks? And how do we get funding for coordinated inventory and control? And the nice thing about that is the speakers that we have coming up are going to touch on each one of those subjects. And lastly, these are some of the other challenges that the cooperative weed management areas, SISMAs, and PRISMs are facing throughout the nation. And you'll see really trying to get people to participate. Sustainability and volunteers came up pretty high. And we purposely asked you not to rate funding as the highest one because we kind of know that's what everybody's up against. So we were trying to look at what other similarities the SISMAs are facing with regards to challenges. And that's all we have from the survey. So I think Chuck will come back up and introduce our next speaker.
Okay, so our first presenter today is Damon Waite, and he is the Senior Director of the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Austin, Texas, and he serves as the Principal Investigator for numerous programs related to the Wildflower Center Invasive Species Initiative, including Invaders of Texas. He also serves on ISAC, or the Invasive Species Advisories Committee, for the National Invasive Species Council. He was past president of National EPSI and past president and the founder of the Texas Invaders program. And he will be talking about the different national organizations related to invasive species.
Thank you, Chuck. My PowerPoint should be up in just a moment. Okay, here we go. I hope everyone can see that. So Chuck asked me to do an overview of the different national invasive species organizations. Now I'm starting to call them NISAWs, for National Invasive Species Organizations, because I only have 10 minutes, so I have to speak quickly, which is hard for me because I'm from Louisiana. So we've got NISC, the National Invasive Species Council, established in 1999 by that famous executive order. It's a council that consists of the secretaries of 13 federal departments that are coming up on the right. The top 3 are the ones that have most of the responsibility for the management of NISC. And it drafts the National Invasive Species Management Plan. They're the host of NISAW. They also take advice from the Invasive Species Advisory Committee, and there's their website down there. So I'm just going to run through these really quickly because there's about 10 of them. ISAC is the Invasive Species Advisory Committee. These are the non-federal experts that provide advice to NISC. They represent a wide variety of different stakeholders, and they make recommendations to help the federal agencies make decisions about invasive species. One of the contributions in the last few years of ISAC is the development of these white papers that you can get on the NISC website, and then that also shows the breakdown of the ISAC subcommittees. Then we have our state councils, and there's approximately 20 states that have invasive species councils. They're often modeled after the National Invasive Species Council. They're usually multi-agency councils consisting of state agencies, but except when they're not, except when they involve NGOs and other partners. And they're usually established by some sort of proclamation or an MOU or some political body. And so they're engaged in state-level project coordination. And here's a list of all the different state invasive species councils and a map, courtesy of Chuck, showing the states that do have invasive species councils. Then there's NISIS, where everyone's at right now. I guess the brown bag lunch is still concluding. That stands for the National Environmental Coalition on Invasive Species. It started in 2003. 17 major environmental organizations are the members of NISIS, and they're all about public policy, advocacy, and supporting different kinds of legislation, but there's experts from each of those environmental organizations that participates in NISIS. Then we've got the National Association of Exotic Pest Plant Councils. It's a coalition of all of the different exotic pest plant councils, the state-based pest plant councils, the IPSIs, the WHOSIs, and the WHATSIs. So it's a mixture of different groups that work on the state level, and NAFC helps coordinate their national objectives. And so sometimes they work on public policy through NAFC. And then here's a list of the different EPSIs and IPSIs that are a member of the National Association, and a map showing the distribution of the individual state-based EPSIs and IPSIs. We have a fairly new group called NNIPSI, the National Network of Invasive Plant Centers. This was just established in 2009. I think there's 6 different members, 7. And these are the emphasis of this group, of course, is on invasive plants. They're all invasive plant centers. They have paid staff, a lot of emphasis on early detection, CWMAs, and but a real plant focus. You've probably heard of the Continental Forest Dialogue, and that's an emphasis on pests and pathogens of forests. Not really an association of groups, but individuals with a stake in forest pests participate in the Continental Forest Dialogue. So it's very national in scope. And more recently, we had a new group formed called NASIN, North American Invasive Species Network, and that was established in 2010. It includes the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, and it's a consortium of experts that is going to soon, according to Chuck, through their website, provide a wealth of resources about invasive species issues for those 3 countries. And there are several organizations shown there on the right that are hubs in NASIN. And then we have the North American Weed Management Association. This might be the last one. And this is a professional association that individuals who are involved in weed management belong to. They have national meetings, and that's NAMA and their committees. You might know NAMA because of their standards that are used for, I think, ranking weeds or collecting data on weeds. Then it really breaks down to the local level, SISMAs and CWMAs, and they are not coalesced in any kind of national organization. They function somewhat independently. They're real on-the-ground weed management. They have certain characteristics. They're usually in a defined geographic area or focused on a single weed problem. MOUs, steering committees, all the stakeholders that are involved belong to these SISMAs, Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas or Cooperative Weed Management Areas. Also, you could throw PRISMs into this category. And there's a map of the distribution of SISMAs, and I don't know what's going on in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas, but we don't have any yet. So, in summary, we've got these local, on-the-ground weed management areas that vary in scale and taxa, but it's the same concept, local coordination. And one of the things we want to talk about or discuss during the panel is there a logical connection between these on-the-ground local efforts, the state efforts, and then the national efforts when we think about all those different national organizations I just ran through. And so here are some of the things we could think about as far as getting funding flowing from the federal level all the way down to the SISMA or CWMA level. And then I started thinking about what are some common characteristics of national invasive species organizations, and it was almost too easy. They exhibit rapid, uncontrolled growth. They can flourish in diverse habitats. They seem to reproduce asexually by budding. They all withstand long periods of dormancy where nothing's going on. And they're highly competitive with each other for limited resources and resistant to control. So when we think about these national invasive species organizations, my word of caution is we should be practicing prevention, which is what about this, and stop new national invasive species organizations from becoming established in the United States. I think we have enough. There are several pathways, meetings of those national invasive species organizations, conference calls, webinars, happy hours. And if you can't prevent it, and you're in a meeting somewhere and someone proposes a new national invasive species organization, look around, and if you see the same people you saw at the last meeting of a national invasive species organization, eradicate the new NISAW before it becomes established. So I jest, but I really do feel like we've got our bases covered when it comes to national invasive species organizations, and we should be looking for ways to strengthen the ones that we already have and not start new ones. Thank you.
So if you're online, the next presenter was supposed to be Doug Johnson, and he was not able to make the meeting. He will be participating in the panel discussion later. So we're going to move on to the next speaker, which is Chris Evans. And Chris Evans is the coordinator for the River to River Cooperative Weed Management Area and has been that for the last 5 years. He facilitates cooperation and collaboration between CWMA partners and works to raise awareness and knowledge about invasive species in southern Illinois. Without, insulting him, that's all the nice things I can say.
Appreciate the glowing introduction there, Chuck. Well, I appreciate the chance to get to come to this and talk to all you here in the audience and all those online. And I think the reason they wanted me to come talk is really because we've had a pretty active CWMA and one that's actually had a paid coordinator for quite a while now. And so kind of the purpose of my talk was to just to kind of demonstrate what you can get done when you have somebody kind of on the ground dedicated to doing this kind of work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the River to River Cooperative Weed Management Area. Get into the reasons and the ways that we hired a coordinator, kind of the purpose behind the coordinator for that CWMA, and then really get into kind of what we've done these last 5 years, and then mention some of the projects we've had underway, and then end up kind of listing some of the benefits I think that you can gain from having a CWMA and then having a CWMA coordinator. I will start by saying I think if you have a CWMA, you're involved in one, and you don't have a coordinator, you're having a hard time getting funding for one, that definitely shouldn't stop you from keeping the good work of a CWMA. I think they're very productive and good to have, even if you don't manage to get a paid staff. All right, so the River to River Cooperative Weed Management Area. Who are we? We were formally established in the fall of 2006, and due to some support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and some state grants, we were fortunate enough to hire a coordinator in 2007, and that was me. And really our goal is pretty broad. It deals just with plants, but we try to address all terrestrial and aquatic invasive plants in southern Illinois. So just if people that maybe are not from Illinois, and when I say Illinois, they have visions of flat cornfields or Chicago skylines, I want to just make sure this is southern Illinois. And so we have just the beautiful areas, everything from 100-foot shelter bluffs to really intact cypress swamps. So it's not what you think of when you hear Illinois. We have one of the reasons I think we have been successful for a CWMA is our broad membership. We have partners everywhere from state partners with DNR, Department of Ag, Department of Transportation, a lot of our federal partners like the National Forest and the Fish and Wildlife refuges, as well as some NGOs and universities. So we have a really broad background of people that are dealing with invasive species in southern Illinois coming together, and I think that really had helped us kind of lay a good foundation for our CWMA. So when they came together, they signed their MOU to make it a formalized partnership, and one of the first goals they had was to pursue getting a coordinator, really to try to keep advancing this idea of the CWMA. So the coordinator's initial goals or purposes was really to implement projects on the ground work through the CWMA, getting stuff done, boots on the ground kind of work. And through that, they really wanted kind of more of this idea of the reason behind the CWMA is really cooperation or collaboration, working together to get more done, this kind of synergy effect. And so the main purpose of the coordinator really is to facilitate that synergy between the partners, as well as just serving as a contact point, keeping the partners updated on new events, new invasive species, issues coming up, new technologies, anything like that. Just be the background work, that person that kind of sifts through all that information and then provides what's relevant to our partners. And then the main thing was develop new projects and acquire and implement funding, or acquire funding and implement these projects. So when I was hired on in 2007, we had a year and a half of funding, and it was completely grant funded from then. Was kind of, if I wanted to stay on, we had to get new projects, we had to keep funding, so it's definitely an incentive for me. So we really wanted to focus in, instead of, invasive species is such a broad topic, there's so many different things you can do. Our main goal was to pick really good projects and then accomplish those really well. So we started out with our initial focus area was really education, awareness, building that foundation, and then going from that to kind of working on our organization, working on our capacity of the region to deal with invasive species, and then kind of to the final effort, which would be kind of coordinating control. And so these are our focus areas. We kind of, initially we started with the first one, and then now we're kind of doing all three. We've kind of built our ability to do more. So one thing we have done is been pretty successful at getting a lot of grants, and from a lot of sources, and that's been very important. If you're going to have a coordinator, you definitely want to fund them and keep them on. So getting these broad background of funding sources is pretty important. And we've got some federal funds, some nonprofit funds, some state funds, all together, and pulled all these resources in to kind of make the CWMA work. Particularly for the first couple years, we didn't have just one big, large grant to pay everything, so we kind of had to do a lot of little projects and smaller grants, and just to get work done, get what we wanted to do on the ground accomplished. So what have we accomplished? For the first 5 years now, through the CWMA, we've brought in just a shade under $1 million in external funds into Southern Illinois to work specifically on invasive plant issues. That's something we're really proud of. As far as, we've had several full-time employees through that, a lot of seasonal employees, and we've actually supported a lot of the independent contractors, the small businesses in Southern Illinois, whether they're doing the control work or doing printing or something like that. So it's really helping the economy out at a certain scale, and also getting good work done. Education-wise, we've had a little over 100 presentations in Southern Illinois with just a shade over 5,000 people attending. And a lot of those are the same people coming back again and again, I'm sure. But still, we're getting that message out. And this is an area, Southern Illinois is pretty sparsely populated. So 5,000 is a pretty big number. We've done a lot of publications, flyers, even a stiltgrass video. And for the last 3 years or so, we've had a website that's had a little over 300,000 hits. And treatment-wise, we've been able to treat a little over 5,000 acres of invasive species in Southern Illinois throughout these 5 years. So just kind of a summary of what we've done on the ground. And we've done these through a wide array of projects, working with both our members and then different partners in Southern Illinois as well. So I wanted to kind of go through just some of the projects, some of the work we've done through the CWMA. One is our publications. We either use publications other people have developed if they work for us, like the Why Should I Care book, or we develop some things that are specific for Southern Illinois to give out. And that's a big thing. These publications, we give them out during CWMA events, but all of our partners also have them. So if you come to Southern Illinois and you show up at a nature center or a NRCS office or a DNR office or the Fish and Wildlife Visitor Center, these publications are there and available to you. And that's something the CWMA does, is basically provide them, develop them, print them, and give them out to our partners, kind of that unifying message. So anywhere any visitor or anybody in Southern Illinois is going to go, they're going to have an opportunity to see this message. Also, we've had a lot of EDRR events. Some early detection has been one of our major focus areas, and through our projects, we've been able to identify some of these new species and then work to eradicate them. So I just wanted to list a few here. The big one we're working on right now, and if you're in the Ohio River, especially the lower Ohio River Valley, this is something you want to look out for, is that picture on the left is Japanese chaff flower. It's a new species making its way down the Ohio River. We've just found it the last few years in Illinois, and it's one of our big species we're trying to work on, a major early detection event. But we've also found some Brazilian elodia, which is the bottom picture. The top picture is an after picture when we found water hyacinth, a little bit of water hyacinth in Illinois. It was a Forest Service employee, and then the next day it was nice. It was eradicated. They came in and just got it all out of there. So I really like to see that rapid response after that. And the bottom picture is actually Amur cork tree, which was one of our partners with Southern Illinois University actually found it on her land, and then in some adjacent Forest Service land. But being able to say, hey, that's a new species, I haven't seen that, and then come to the CWMA to help identify it was really a nice service that we could provide. So these early detection events is really kind of a crux of what we're trying to do, is get these species out early. So the projects we've done these with, we really try to make sure they complement each other. We want to remove redundancy. We don't want to do a project that's already being done by somebody else. We try to identify gaps, aspects of invasive species management that are not getting done, and then get a project and get funding to fill in those gaps. And so a lot of it really is kind of laying this foundation and then building in this cooperation, and then hopefully engaging stakeholders and, like I said, complementing work. So some of the projects, one of the big things we do basically is just keep our partners updated. Kind of yearly training sessions to show their staff, their field staff, what's new. You know, there's a lot of new things coming out. There's a lot of species alerts, and it may be difficult for somebody that doesn't always have a invasive species as their full-time part of their job to keep up with all this information that's coming out through all these NISAWs. Isn't that right, Damon? So part of what we do is basically act as a filter. We look at all this information, we decide what's relevant, what's important for Southern Illinois, and then bring that information to our partners. It saves their time from having to look for all this and kind of weed through, no pun intended, all this information. And then we can do that through our work and then just provide them the relevant information. So we do a lot of that. Like I said, usually yearly trainings for their field staff. We try to participate in cooperative research when it's relevant to the questions for Southern Illinois. This is just a map of some work we're looking at, effectiveness of different control methods for eradicating curly pondweed. But anything like that may be a question that one of our partners have, we try to find some way to kind of answer those through research. It's not a big part of our work, but when we do it, it is important. Spread prevention through projects like boot brush stations. We have 40-some different boot brush stations down at trailheads in Southern Illinois, as well as boat ramp signs, just encouraging people to clean their boats. We're thinking about putting in some boat wash stations now. Demonstration plots to show the effectiveness of control. We've installed a couple-acre plot next to one of our very highly visited visitor centers at a state park where we've controlled half of an infestation and left the other half kind of running rampant. It's Oriental bittersweet. And so we actually put a trail through there. So now people can walk through a managed forest and kind of see some of the natives coming back, and then they can walk through a heavily invaded area to see kind of the impacts. Our goal is just to have that to show firsthand and visually show the impacts of invasives and the benefit from management. We're hoping to put a few more of these at different state parks in the coming years. We also have an equipment bank to loan equipment out, some specialized invasive plant equipment, so people don't have to buy the same equipment and only use it a couple times a year. They can actually borrow it from us. We've been really instrumental in developing Illinois Invasive Species Awareness Month, which is just a month-long event similar to this, but we wanted to do it a month in Illinois, where we really deal with just a lot of events to try to raise awareness to the public for invasive species. engaging volunteers is something we do. One of the ways we do that is through our Weed Watch program, where we train volunteers and they adopt natural areas and then go out and monitor those areas and map all the invasive species. And then we actually put all that information into, we work with EdMaps, and so we have that information and any other information that's collected through our partners, where we have it all in one single place. So any of our partners can come in and see what's in Southern Illinois, whether it's they collected it, a volunteer collected, or another agency. It's kind of all housed in the same place. Really easily allows them to get a quick picture of that in particular invasive species in Southern Illinois. And then one thing for the last 4 years, we've had an internship program where we have students come in for 9 weeks in the summer, do grueling hard work, and learn a lot. And that's been really effective for us. We've actually, several of these students have then went on to either go to grad school with invasive species or actually gotten a job in invasive species. So I'm kind of happy to see that. And they do a lot of good work for me, the stuff that I don't like doing. So that demo plot, you know, we do that in the summer. It's 100 degrees. I'll get them started, and then I'll say, well, you know, I've really got some office work I need to do. So just tell me when you're done. I hope none of them's listening. One thing we did a couple years ago was actually have a stiltgrass. Japanese stiltgrass is one of the big problems we have, one of our major species. And there just wasn't a lot of information together about it. 1 minute, okay. I didn't know what that little symbol meant. So we really got together, got a lot of experts together on stiltgrass, and brought together as one conference for this species. Really useful, really raising awareness and building people's knowledge level about this species in Southern Illinois. And we have a strike team where we have people on the ground doing work full-time, two people full-time throughout the whole year, just controlling invasive species. They control usually around 1,500 to 2,000 acres a year. We've had this now for 2.5 years. Really been an effective way for us to control invasives. And also volunteer work days, just getting people out there pulling garlic mustard, pulling bittersweet seedlings. It's been a good way to engage the public and then also get work done as well. Some of the new projects we're doing, we're just getting started, is right-of-way restoration, where we're taking some of these linear habitats that have typically been spread conduits for some invasives and try to actually put native species back into them. We're investigating the ability to survey for bush honeysuckle aerially, and then we're actually looking at wilderness excursions to do some stewardship work, invasive species control. So that's kind of what we're doing, and a lot of that's been because we've had a paid coordinator, just allowing us to do this much work. So kind of the reasons I think that you can get a lot of benefit from having somebody to work specifically for your CWMA is simply you're facilitating that cooperation, that you're not relying on people's free time or the other time they can do when they have a different job. It's somebody on the ground that's full-time working on kind of building this cooperation. And it simply increases the quantity of what you can do, not necessarily the quality, because there's a lot of CWMAs that are doing good work without a coordinator. You can just get a lot more projects on the ground. And you're establishing a local expert and kind of a contact point that anybody can come to for questions. And having this single person really develops that working relationships both with funders and with the landowners that you're trying to work with. And like I said, it simply allows for projects that wouldn't otherwise get done. And then we're trying to complement the work that's underway. And basically, it goes down to you're getting a person working on invasive species full-time in your area. And I think that's all I have.
And thank you, Chris. And our next presenter, we're asking questions at the end of all the speakers. Is that okay? Okay. So hold your questions both online and in the crowd. And we've got a lot of time at the end for questions and discussion for everybody. So the next speaker is Tony Furness with the National Park Service. He is an invasive species specialist for the Florida and Caribbean Exotic Plant Management Team and is the co-chair and one of the founders of the Everglades Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And he's going to talk kind of following along with what Chris talked about, but showing some examples of success along the early detection rapid response line of things.
forward and backward. Okay. And unlike Damon, I speak really fast, and I brought every single one of the slides that I have, so it's just going to be like I only have 15 minutes, so I'll be talking a little fast. Anyways, what I'm going to be talking about is the Everglades Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area and some of the early detection rapid response successes we had. But before I talk about that, I want to talk a little bit about Everglades SISMA, since you guys probably aren't familiar with it. In 2004, the National Park Service and the South Florida Water Management District held the first Everglades Invasive Species Summit. It's the first time we actually brought everybody that was working on invasive species together in one room. And there was researchers, people working on plants and animals, so everybody got together, and it was extremely successful. And as a result of that success, that led to the creation of the Everglades SISMA in 2006. Everglades SISMA pretty much covers the whole Everglades area, all the way from Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge down to Everglades National Park. And the map here kind of shows that it doesn't cover all the way to the coast, but it does. The last steering committee meeting, we all motioned to extend the boundaries to cover urban Miami-Dade County, Broward, and southern Palm Beach County. Our partners, there's just so many, I'm not going to go through them, but we have federal, state, local governments, universities, NGOs, tribes, private citizens. I mean, it's just incredible, all the partners that we've taken on working together. Our mission is to improve the effectiveness of invasive species management, sharing information, innovation, and technology across borders. Our goals are to integrate coordination, control, and management strategies, integrate information and technology transfer, and to provide for early detection and rapid response to new invasive species. And even though we're the first, cooperative invasive species management area, thanks to the efforts of the Florida Invasive Species Partnership, these things have sprung up all over. Almost all of Florida now is covered either by cooperative weed management areas or SISMA. So our first goal is integrate coordination, control, and management strategies. We do that, as I mentioned, through the annual Everglades Invasive Species Summit. We also produce an annual report, kind of like talking about the stuff that we did during the year, and we do a coordinated work plan for the following year. The South Florida Water Management District developed an Oracle database for the tracking of invasive plant treatment information, and through all the partners in SISMA, we now record all our data on this Oracle database as well. It's all web-based. Almost all the agencies utilize private contractors for the treatment of invasive plants, and to try to be a little bit more cost-effective in developing these contracts. This year, the National Park Service, working through eSISMA, we developed a federal contract that could be utilized by all the federal agencies. Rather than each agency developing their own contract, we have one contract that the Fish and Wildlife Service could use, the Park Service, the Corps, et cetera. We've also develop standard operating procedures for the contractors. So the contractors, when they move from one area to the other, don't have different regulations or things they got to do. Now, basically, it's the exact same standard operating procedures for all of the contractors. Our service Everglades SISMA provides to all of our partners is providing shape files. We do digital aerial sketch mapping, where we basically every year we fly half of the whole Everglades SISMA area, and we map certain invasive plants that we can identify from the air. This is an example of the Brazilian pepper, Chinus terebintifolius, distribution throughout the Everglades area. For integrated outreach efforts, we have a Everglades SISMA website. How many? You had 300,000 hits in the last 300 years. We had 301,000 hits. I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but so we have a great website. The outreach subcommittee does a series of public events. They're always setting up displays at different, events throughout the Everglades area, including Pet Amnesty Days and Everglades Day at Loxahatchee. Working with the Florida Outdoor Advertising Association, the United States Army Corps of Engineers produced this. We had a billboard campaign where these billboards were set up throughout the state. There's the one on the lower left. You can see one of Now Monitor Lizard. We're set up throughout the state, basically encouraging the public not to let it loose and to go to the website for additional information on invasive species. The Park Service, through eSISMA, developed a series of these multimedia exhibits, and these are on display at Deering Estate. It's one of our county parks, at Everglades National Park, and then also at Zoo Miami. We're also big into the whole social media thing. We figured we had to get in there. So we have, of course, a Facebook page, and we do a lot of Twitter. And then we haven't done really too much with the fish, so we're trying to get into the whole fish aspect. So last year we started a non-native fish roundup. We got a lot of radio promotion and newspaper coverage, and pretty much we invite the public to catch non-native fish and basically just try to educate the public about the problems that non-native fish pose to the Everglades ecosystem. For information and technology transfer, we have a newsletter that we have online and we also distribute at different events. We've developed an identification deck for native and non-native reptiles in Florida, and we give those people who go out in the field so they kind of know which are the bad players and which are the good players. We've also, University of Florida developed for us Introduce Reptile and Early Detection and Documentation Training. It's online, so people go in there and kind of like learn how to respond to snakes. And also working with the Park Service and TNC, we had this Python patrol set up where instructors go to different people that routinely go on the field, researchers, and tell them how to identify the snakes and how to safely capture them. So now we get to early detection and rapid response. So we have an early detection and rapid response subcommittee, and they've developed a management plan. Great management plan has clearly defined objectives and tasks that we have to do. We identify all the priority species that we have to work with, and it has a decision-making protocol. We also utilize EDMAPs for rapid reporting, verification, and dissemination of the information through the www.I'veGotOne.org. We also got a phone number that's managed by the State of Florida Wildlife Conservation Commission, where you basically call up that phone number and you can report that species, and then it'll be disseminated to somebody to respond. There's the EDMAPs, and you can see this is the reporting for EDMAPs online. And then one of the really coolest things that University of Georgia helped us out with through Park Service funding and others is the I've Got One iPhone app. So if you got an iPhone, you can now basically, you're out in the field, you could see a species, you could find out what that species is, you could get a coordinates, report all the information, take a picture of it, and it gets on the database and quickly sends out to somebody to verify and maybe respond depending on the species. So some of the initiatives that we've had with early detection and rapid response is the sacred ibis, Lemnitsa racemosa, the North African rock python, the non-monitor lizard, and the Argentine black and white tegus. We have a few others, but I only had 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to cover these. So the sacred ibis is a native to sub-Saharan Africa. It's in Europe, it's an invasive species from a bunch of releases from captivity. It's established in France, Belgium, Italy, and the Canary Islands. It's listed as one of the 100 worst invasives in Europe. It's a predator of eggs and chicks of seabirds, particularly gulls, terns, cormorants, pelicans, and gannets. And you can see in this photo, here's a couple sacred ibis just helping themselves to a sandwich tern colony. And so in Florida, the problem was Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Miami Metro Zoo, now Zoo Miami, had a population of these sacred ibises. And when Hurricane Andrew came in, it basically destroyed the enclosure, and these birds got out. They began distributing themselves throughout South Florida, and a breeding pair was found over at Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. Bill Thomas and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service strike team went out there and dispatched those birds. But the problem is, during 2006, we kept having numerous sightings all throughout South Florida. So in 2008, Everglades SISMA, Early Detection Rapid Response Subcommittee and the Steering Committee decided that it was probably time to act. And the main reason was because we were worried that it was going to affect some of our native wading bird populations, particularly the federally threatened or listed wood stork. So we developed an eradication plan. We applied for funding from the Everglades Foundation. We got $25,000, not much, but it actually worked out pretty well. And then USDA Wildlife Service, which is heavily involved with Everglades SISMA, they decided, we basically contracted with them to do the work. They developed an environmental assessment. They worked with the National Wildlife Research Center, got some GPS satellite transmitters, applied them to 4 birds, so we have like some Judas birds, and then they set out on trapping and shooting all the sacred ibises in an attempt to eradicate them. And we utilize EDMAPs a lot. Here's some of the EDMAPs reports. And you can see as people would report these were different photos that were reported into EDMAPs, but people were able to respond using those sightings in EDMAPs, as well as USDA was monitoring different bird boards to find out when people spotted the sacred ibis so they could respond to those populations. So from 2002 to 2010, the USDA removed 73 ibises from various locations. And then in 2011, we got 2. They were actually banded birds, so we're not sure if it was from the same population or some additional relief. But anyways, we're cautiously optimistic that we may have an eradication of the sacred ibis, so I think that was a pretty good moment there for Everglades SISMA. Another species is Lemnitzer racemosa. This is 5 minutes already. Wow. This is I gotta speak even faster. This is an exotic mangrove species from Southeast Asia. It was an accession plant at Fairchild Tropical Botanic Gardens, right there where that little circle is. And this is close up. You can see Fairchild off to the left, and Matheson Hammock, it's County Park on the right-hand side. So Tom Smith, he's a biologist with USGS. He basically found this in 2008, notified Everglades, SISMA, and Fairchild, and basically we decided that we need to do something because there was thousands of plants now all around these accession plants. So working together, basically had 2 SISMA work days. The main priority was kind of like delimit the population, just find out how bad it was, and then we started taking out all the seed-bearing and fruiting trees, just try to kind of like reduce the spread. These are a couple of different activities during the work day. This is a shot on the left. You can see them, but you can't really see it yet until I show the circles. But that's the mature trees on the area was treated on the right. So you can see the density was pretty high, covered about 15 acres. In 2010, we had additional work day, and then we decided that there was just so many seedlings on the ground that we had to spray those with herbicide. So we did some herbicide trials because we didn't know how to kill Lemnitzer racemosa. So we did some herbicide trials, found the right herbicide. FWC provided $30,000 for a contract, and we treated all the seedlings the initial time. In 2011, we had an additional work day. In 2012, we had a work day, and then we're hoping to have one more contractor sweep of the area. And again, we're cautiously optimistic that we might be able to eradicate Lemnitzer. These are just some pictures of seedlings, more seedlings, eradication is possible. North African rock python. The North African rock python, you probably all heard of the Burmese python. This is another python, native to sub-Saharan Africa. It gets up to about 16 feet in length. It lives up to about 15 to 30 years. The females reach sexual maturity at about 36 months of age, and they can lay up to 100 eggs. They're incredible problems because they're carnivorous and they eat every native mammal, bird, and reptile they can get their hands on. So this is an area, this is the Bird Right Basin. This is like in that time period before 2010, there were I think it was 5 sightings of, some of them were roadkill, some of them were sightings, and these are the areas where the rock python was found. So when the Everglades SISMA decided that we needed to find out more information about that rock python to see if we could eradicate it, so we had set up a survey from January 12th to 14th of 2010 with the objective of verifying the existence of the population of the pythons in the Bird Drive Basin, verifying the presence of the Burmese pythons, whether there was Burmese pythons as well, verifying the spread of African pythons beyond the boundaries of the Bird Drive Basin. So these are the areas. We kind of like set up these different treatment areas. We had walking and boat surveys and road surveys. And then that day actually turned out to be, those 3 days turned out to be really great days because it was like one of the coldest days that I could remember. It was like sub-freezing temperatures when we started, so that means the snakes were going to be lethargic, trying to sun themselves out in the open, so it'd be a lot easier to get. We started out by kind of going over all the logistics, showing maps, teaching everybody how to catch the snakes, and these are what the results of that. This was one of the ones that was caught on the 12th. This was Jane Doe from Miami County, one of the ones they got. We realized at that moment that our snake bags were a little bit too small. Only the head fit inside. This was the snake. This is the same snake. We actually took one of the photos with it, but since we drug it out and they stayed out in the field, they were mad that they didn't have like a photo, so they photoshopped their faces onto our fit, which is pretty fun. Here's another snake, Marty Main. It was a Burmese python that we got down one of the canals. This was an African rock python that we saw outside the Bird Drive Basin, sunning itself. And then we got that one and drug it back. There's another picture of it. And there's another one with the Scott's team, Bob Reed. Anyway, for the three-day event, we got 3 female African pythons, 2 male African pythons. We found that there was Burmese pythons in that area. Also got a red-tailed boa. A month later, Miami-Dade County, they didn't have enough of that. They wanted to go back out to that area, so they went out on their own. They got another one. Then there was a big mulch pile where they had a lot of we assumed there was a lot of pythons underneath there. So it was Water Management District property, so they went in to get rid of the brush pile, and they mulched the whole thing. And another female came out, and they captured it while they were mulching. And then another one got chopped up in the mulching. And then also found some eggs in the area. And then since that time, there's been an additional 5 snakes that have come out of that area. And this is just the total locations of where they've been seen. Am I out of time already? come on, I got Nile monitor. All right. So Nile monitor lizard. So this is from Africa, another exotic species. Big lizard, eats a lot. I mean, it's going to threaten all sorts of native species, especially egg layers. Burrowing owls, gopher tortoises, American crocodile. It's a huge problem. And these are the locations from EdMaps, everywhere it was found. And you can see up all the way on the left, that's Cape Coral. That area had an established population, and you could see they're now establishing in West Palm Beach and then along the coast. So you can see how they move there readily. You can see the canal network through all our drainage efforts. You could see all the different canals going everywhere. So we basically set up a nice little road system for Nile monitors to move outside all throughout the state. So in Homestead, we've got 27 Nile monitors to date. Actually, the Nile monitors have pretty much almost eradicated the burrowing owl population at Homestead Air Reserve Base. There used to be burrowing owls all over. There's only like 2 nesting pairs now left there. And we just got a 5.5-footer about a month ago, and we haven't had one since then. But now you can see that this is a mating pair over in Palm Beach County. And to try to combat this, FWC's distributing outreach materials. They're doing trapping along with the Water Management District. They're doing stomach content analysis. They're assessing the possibility of eradicating it locally in Palm Beach and in Homestead over the next year, and the development of a management plan. And the last one is the Argentine black and white tegu, a native of Argentina and Paraguay. It's it's kind of like an Nile monitor. It eats everything, but it does eat plants as well. It's omnivorous. And its range, it's got a pretty good range, so you could see, potentially based on that range, it could go pretty far north, well beyond Florida. And it's invasive everywhere it's been introduced. You could see in Brazil, basically they introduced 2 pairs to control rats, and in just a few years, the population has increased, so now there's over 2,000 to 8,000 individuals on that little island. And this is a distribution of the Argentine black and white tegus throughout Florida and Southeast. So we first found the tegu in 2008. In 2009, we started doing surveys, trapping, and stomach content analysis. We did the same thing in 2010. In 2011, we bumped it up to do camera traps and burrow cameras. And this year, we're going to continue. University of Florida, Frank Mazzotti's group, they're going to continue, and Zoo Miami, they're going to continue to trap and do radio telemetry. So here's some of the traps that we had to develop trapping. So here's some of the traps that we use. And here's the trapping data, which doesn't look too well. In 2009, trapping the same amount of traps, we got 13 tegus, 2010, 21, and despite our trapping effort in 2011, it's jumped up to 124 tegus. These are the areas where the tegus are found, some shots on radio telemetry, and this is some more information on the radio telemetry. The camera traps, some photos of them that we captured. Here's them eating eggs. They're pretty good at digging up eggs. These are some of the stomach contents of mammals, reptiles, birds, amphibians, insects, snails, and fruits. Conclusion, tegus are continuing to expand in Florida. There's little to no chance of eradication unless we get funding. And by the way, almost all these ecosystem activities that I'm bringing up is just volunteer-based. There's almost no funding other than basically each agency's funding. So I just want to talk a little bit about the needs and gaps. We need to stop the leak. We need some more prevention measures to keep these species from continuing to flood us. We need to facilitate the development of resource sharing mechanisms across agencies, kind of like the fire models. We need to promote the establishment of a federal Everglades EDR coordinator. We have a state coordinator, but we don't have a federal coordinator. We need to develop and direct a sustainable EDR team with contributions from all the stakeholders. Increase funding for new priority invasive species, both plant and animal. And that's pretty much it. I'd like to thank everybody from the steering committee and subcommittee for helping out. Sorry it took so long.
Okay, and I apologize to everybody online for the speaker problems. Those should be corrected with our next presentation because it is going to be done remotely. So it'll take us a second to get the changeover made. But Susan Ketsey, who works with the invasive species, is the invasive species program manager for the Leech Lake Division of Resource Management in Cass Lake, Minnesota, where she manages 400,000 acres of forest and 400,000 acres of wetlands at the headwaters of the Mississippi. Susan has been known to take her passion for protecting culturally important plant resources to new heights. She was once spotted dressed as a life-size, I wouldn't be a life-size, but she was once spotted dressed as an emerald ash borer. So and hopefully Susan's fixing to be online, and you're going to be able to hear her both in the room and virtually. Susan, you can start. Susan, we can't hear you. If you can hear us, if you could unmute, that would be great. Susan, we still cannot hear you. Susan, try speaking now.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go for it.
Now can you hear me?
Yes, Susan, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, goodness, woo! All right, well, let's see. Can we start by going backwards just a little bit? Can you still hear me? I need to know if I'm being heard.
Yes, Susan, go ahead.
Okay, great. All right. Well, so for something completely different and not so sexy as all those reptiles, I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that are faced with managing tribal lands. As mentioned earlier, I work as the Invasive Species Program Manager of the Leech Lake Reservation, which initially was an 800,000-acre portioned parcel of land for the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe that was intended to be their permanent homeland, and that was an 800,000-acre portion of land which is a mixture of northern hardwood forests and 50% of that is water. And we're seated at the headwaters of the Mississippi River. So back in 1855, the reservation was established, and pretty close to its current or its approximate boundary is the same as it was established in 1855. However, I guess I don't know if you guys can. Are you still hearing me?
Yes,
yep.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a complication with my program on this end. I guess and there's an animation thing with the title that I didn't put on, but bear with me when I move from slide to slide. When I thought about talking about this particular aspect of managing invasive species, I think the most important thing really is to have an understanding of the land itself and the different passages of laws, articles, and acts that have changed the ways in which the people here can interact with their resources. So back in 1887, there was an act called the General Allotment Act, or the Dawes Act, that was passed. And through this particular act, each head of the household was allotted 160 acres of non-forested land, in which they were supposed to turn from being gatherers and hunters of the woods to farmers. And then all of the surplus land, after it had been allotted to all the heads of tribal households, was then opened up to non-tribal settlers who were interested in forestry or logging. So the legacy of this particular act is that over a period of time, like if you were to look at 6 generations going forward, there's just been an amazing fractionation across the landscape of the resources being held by numerous family members. So in addition to that, you have another set of acts that have been systematically employed to take further land away from the tribes within that 800,000 acres. Those acts include the Nelson Act, which was another act to open up more forestry to private timber industries. The Steenerson Act of 1904, which was another logging act, and then the Burke Act, which allowed the Secretary of Interior to basically deem whether Indians were considered competent or not to manage their land. And the result of all of this is basically a very fractionated and checkerboard ownership. And then, in approximately 1902, the Morris Act established a forest reserve over and beyond the existing reservation boundary. So I think it was back in 1908 when the actual Chippewa National Forest was formed, but it's been as back as far as 1902 when the forest layer was laid across the tribal layer. And so what this means is that the tribal members themselves really didn't have the same access to those forests to continue their traditional lifeways. And it also kind of thrust upon us this obligated partnership for all of the future land management questions that arise. And, there are lots of different examples that I could give you about conflicting goals, but we won't go into that. It's just say that we're continuously trying to find new ways to share similar perspectives and trying to work this out. It's an unusual and somewhat frustrating situation for probably both parties, really. Okay. I already mentioned that, one of the results is that there's a checkerboard of ownership across the reservation. There's 2 separate boundaries on this map. The interior boundary and the darker colors indicate the reservation boundary. And then that grayer set of checkerboards is the additional lands outside of the reservation that fall under Chippewa National Forest ownership. So inside the interior boundary, you have red pieces, which are tribal land. The federal land is this mossy green color. The light green is state, and there's 4 different counties that fall within the reservation, and those are in gold. And then there's a smattering of private residential and private timber properties, which is in beige. So within that 800,000 acres, the actual amount of land that falls into Indian ownership is only 29,700 something. So much of the land base really is owned by the Chippewa National Forest, and they have a different set of resource management goals than many tribal members have, as I mentioned before. But what this really does in terms of the band being able to kind of decide its own fate and future of managing resources is that this checkerboard really impairs their ability to pool those resources and use the land to their own advantage, either socially, economically, or environmentally. And also, I guess, one of the things that we run into is there's jurisdictional challenges and multiple authorities that often claim, they have authority to do particular activities, and when that base of authority isn't shared very well, it can lead to some clashes. Okay, so one of the additional difficulties with managing this reservation for invasive species is that we are tasked with managing for aquatic terrestrial and forested land. We started out with $30,000 and have had no designated or long-term funding in the past. And we're still pretty much grant-based and project-based in our funding. This results in an amazing ability for us to spend lots of time at the desk instead of on the ground doing the implementation that needs to be done. Because it's project-based, we have to find enough projects to support the employees, and that makes it really difficult to retain employees because you can only do so many projects to get enough money to support full-time people. And at this point in time, I have about 9 different contracts, grants, or cooperative agreements for just this year, which increases administrative duties and suggesting that it impedes growth because, all of these challenges prevent us from being able to get on the ground and do the work that we want to do. So progress lags behind vision. Despite all those challenges, I just wanted to highlight one particular project that we've been working on since 2009. It's our wildlife parsnip timed mowing project, which started out on Oak Point Road, and basically we realized that for whatever reason, the mowing that had been occurring on the Minnesota Department roads, county roads, and also tribal roads had been occurring too late in the season, and the seeds were actually being spread by the mowing carriage, and we needed to adjust the timing of that mowing and also double the width. So we started out back in 2009 just using a few dollars from the NRCS, the BIA, and then an in-kind match with the Leech Lake Roads Department to start addressing wild parsnip. And then we took this idea of working on wild parsnip to the Onagum community, where they were also having some run-ins with wild parsnip. And for people who aren't aware, wild parsnip has it's a health hazard because it has a very nasty impact on the skin. If it comes in contact with your skin, there's an oil on it that when it's exposed to light can create open sores that look a lot like burns, and they take a long time to heal. So I didn't want to just assume that people in the Onagum community wanted to go out and pull parsnip for the day, so we decided to throw a party in the community of Onagum, and we invited lots of different partners, and one of the partners that showed up was a gentleman named Reno Wells from the Turtle Lake Township, and he's the gentleman standing on the left in the white shirt and dark sunglasses on. And he got pretty excited about helping us out and actually was pretty concerned about the impacts, not just to people that are in the community in Onagum, but to township members as well who drive ATVs or use roadsides for gathering. And he decided that he was going to take this to the Association of Townships Board, and they wrote a letter to the state and finally got wild parsnip listed as a species of concern for management. So that was back in 2010. And by 2011, we had managed to really grow our partnership from just the Onagum community and our initial funders from NRCS and the Bureau to include the Chippewa National Forest, Cass County, Turtle Lake Township, and Leech Lake Roads. And we just decided that we were going to advertise our efforts along this road going up to the Onagum. And that's a picture of our invasive species control project in progress. And so not only are we doing some double width mowing, we are timing that mowing, and we are doing multiple mowing throughout the year to reduce seed production. So for this year, we've got some additional funding secured through the Rural Schools Act Fund, which is appropriated through the Chippewa National Forest. And that's going to allow us to hire a crew to reach beyond the mower deck and pull the wild parsnip that's growing along the edge of the woods between the road line within the right-of-way and just cannot be reached by a mower. This is going to help put Onagum community members to work, and it continues to raise awareness of the issue. Now, this particular species isn't one that we think we're going to be able to eradicate, but because it has such a nasty side effect and impacts human health, it's become a very important plant to control and work on within the reservation. And I guess I wanted to make sure that people understood that the reason that it is so important is that tribes usually have a very different point of view on the use of plants, and they are still many members of the tribal community are out actively gathering plants from the woods and on the roadsides to use for traditional purposes, whether it's medicinal or ceremonial use. They're very involved with using the plants that are growing here and there, and we're not necessarily aware of the impacts of wild parsnip. So I guess what I thought in terms of what I could leave you with, and from my perspective, is that it's really important if you're going to be working with a tribal entity to understand that what that tribe's history is. I mean, I just breezed through the land aspects of the reservation and how that has impacted the people there and their ability to access their resources and determine their own future. Each tribe has their own history, and that really shapes their viewpoint. So I would encourage everybody to try and understand what that history is, and if you don't know it, feel free to ask questions and really genuinely listen as well as you can to hear some things that are kind of hard as a non-tribal person to hear, but overall I think it's important for the success of the project so that you can build the respect and understanding necessary. Next, I would encourage people to try and respect and incorporate the traditional spiritual perspective. The reason why I say that is I run into a lot of tribal folks mentioning to me that even wild parsnip, which is not native to this country and invasive, has medicinal properties. And it's disrespectful to the plant, and it's disrespectful to them for us to be managing it and harvesting it. So one way that we've been addressing that is we want to try and make those plants available then to the people that could use them. Granted that, we're not giving them seed heads, but we're giving them parts of the plants that aren't going to be reproductive. And so that's another portion of this program is finding outlets so that people can continue to use these resources for traditional purposes. Next, I encourage people to recognize that most tribes lack designated funding, which really limits your growth, the scope that you can really tackle things on the ground, and we often don't have the infrastructure necessary. We're really in a situation where we need to find some long-term money. It doesn't have to be a lot, but just to know that there's something you can depend on from year to year to help you build capacity and build infrastructure. And every tribe has different priorities for their own resources, so a tribe down in Florida is not going to have the same perspective on what's important to manage as folks in Minnesota. And I think, unfortunately, there's sometimes people assume tribes have this connection and they're all going to have the same concerns, but that's not necessarily the case. So, again, if you don't know, make sure you ask and then be willing to listen to what they have to say. And so if you have any questions and you want to get a hold of me directly, I have contact information here. Please feel free to give me a shout, and I'd be happy to help. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Susan, and we are going to it's going to be a few minutes. We're going to get set up for the panel, and be sure to send your online questions to either, not to Dave Moorhead, but to Christina Serbersoff King, or to everybody. And then we will, in just a few minutes, we will start the question and answer panel discussion part. And for our panel, we have all the speakers, Damon, Chris, Tony, and Susan, and then also Chris Serbersoff King, myself, Chuck Bargeron, Kate Howell, who's representing the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, and then Doug Johnson, who's from California Invasive Plant Council, who's also available on the phone. So give us just 1 minute, and we'll be ready.
All right, so we have a couple of questions that we can start this panel discussion with, but do remember that if you are out on the web, we are watching for your questions and comments. So if you had a specific question for our speaker, now's the time to type that in and send it to Christina Serbersoff King in the chat panel and or all participants. And that way we can read those out to the speakers. If you have a general question, if you have, to this audience or to the subject of partnerships or need for national conversations, all of that can be sent in via the chat box to Christina Serbersoff King. And for those of you in the audience, you can just raise your hand. How novel is that? And I will walk over with this microphone. And we do have to have everybody speak into the microphone for the questions and answers, because that's the only way that the 140 people that are listening on the web can hear us, okay? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Are there any? I have questions to ask, but I'm first just going to look around and make sure there's nobody here who has a question before I get started. So I'm going to pass this to Ann.
Okay, I have a question for Chris. When you talked about identifying gaps to determine what work needed to be done with...
Do you mind saying who you are?
Oh, I'm sorry. Ann Gibbs, the Maine Department of Agriculture. When you talked about discussions about identifying gaps to determine what work needed to be done, I'm just curious what group you used as a sounding board, or was it just your CWMA, or did you talk to state folks, federal folks? How broad did you go to determine what, those gaps?
And there's a moment lag as we walk across.
Well, kind of what we did to start with was really kind of do an analysis of who's doing what with invasive species. So all of our different partners, or people that even weren't our partners, we asked them, what are they doing? What are their responsibilities? What are their the duties that they do with invasive species? And then we kind of brainstormed, and you could see that DOT may do state roads, and Crab Orchard or one of these refuges may do their sides. And we kind of identified, well, nobody's really working on herbaceous plants in forest on private lands. And so it was more of analyzing what's already being done, and then trying to identify, just looking at other areas where we know there's problems with invasives, but nobody's directly addressing them. Well, for our CWMA, oh yeah, we're not going to work in the rest of the state.
So the clarification that was there was whether or not Chris was working the entire state of Illinois, and it is constrained to the boundaries of his cooperative weed management area. Susan and Doug, you guys can talk up at any time. You have this great ability to be able to be heard, so please feel free to answer. And we have a question from the web.
Okay, we've got 3 follow-up questions actually for Chris's answers, so we'll get those right now. Okay, let's see here. Chris, you seem to have a fairly large region for your CWMA, 11 counties. There seems to be a push in my state to have numerous small CWMAs, which I think would be hard on resource managers. Do you have smaller community-based groups within the CWMA? And if not, how do you keep people engaged locally? and then a couple of others followed with who supports your CWMA coordinator position, and then also for smaller CWMAs covering one county, do you see a benefit of having a full-time coordinator, or can it be more suited for a larger coverage area?
Did you get all that? So part of that was looking at having a coordinator for, it's an 11-county region, and the person submitting the question so that in their region they're more one county by one county. So does it make sense having a coordinator for each county? And so you collectively coordinate 11 counties. And are there smaller partnerships within your CWMA that you sort of manage as well?
In terms of responding to the question about smaller partnerships, we're really projects based, and so we kind of form partnerships or working groups or ad hoc committees, whatever you want to call them, based on the projects that we do, instead of geographic region, more so. So I would say no, we don't have smaller sub-working groups in individual counties in our area. It's more the projects that we do, and they kind of span that. As the other question about do I see the relevance or the need for a coordinator in a very small one-county-wide one, maybe not so much there, simply because of the amount of work. I mean, yeah, if you can get one, that'd be great. But kind of having a bigger CWMA, there's always a lot of work to be done. So I don't know. I think you can, if you had a lot of small ones, maybe put them together in a consortium or find some other way to work together. The problem with a very small CWMA is it's funding. It's trying to get funding for, a coordinator for just that small area. Oh, and the last one was, where did my funding come through? A lot of different grants. I've been called a vulture when it comes to getting grants. I'll jump on any little pile of money. So we really cobble together with a lot of different funding sources.
So I'm looking around the room, and I'm thinking maybe we start at this scale, because we do want to kind of keep this conversation moving through regional and national scale. But at the scale of individual SISMAs or CWMAs, does anybody have any other questions? We've got people on the web who are representing these. Doug Johnson's very familiar with them out west. Kate's familiar with them. I'm familiar with them in our region. Does anybody have specific questions about how these locally led grassroots partnerships work before we kind of keep expanding the scale of discussion? Yeah, sorry about that.
Sure. David Pagos with the California Department of Food and Ag. Chris, just real quick, what percentage of your time is on grant writing or reports for those grants? I'm imagining it's pretty substantial.
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably between a quarter and a third of the time is just administering or writing grants.
Any other questions, David? Did we have any questions of the region, the local scale? I had one here, and I think this could go across maybe I'll pitch it to Tony first, and then give everyone time to think about it. But it says, how does a formalized cooperative weed management area differ from the cooperation that goes on between groups or agencies all of the time anyway? And Susan, maybe that's something for you to think about too, because the model, that last project you were showing to us, was a cooperation of multiple partners, but isn't formally called a cooperative weed management area. So Tony, how do you think, because you went from informal partnership to formal cooperative weed management area, what do you think the difference is, and what did you gain from that?
Well, it's kind of funny, though, because in the Everglades area, we were all kind of working together originally. But I think that kind of like what really helped us out when we actually formalized this, now when we're basically just trying to do projects, a lot of the times before we were formalized, it'd be hard to get like volunteer, be able to just Shanghai volunteers from a Park Service unit or from some other area to work on a project. But now that everybody's actually signed the MOU, when we have our work days, we get a lot more turnout from all the different agencies. So but the only thing I could really think of is that it just helps coordination a lot easier.
This is Kate Howe with the Midwest Invasive Plant Network. I'd say one of the major benefits of having a CWMA and a formalized partnership is that you can plan long term. It allows you to put together a strategic plan for the region and then an annual work plan and come up with ideas of where you'll get the money to do that work for the particular year. So it sort of institutionalizes this partnership so that if, say, Tony were to take a new job or retire or whatever, the partnership doesn't die with him. It'll continue because there's an agreement in place.
This is Doug Johnson on the phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'd just like to jump in and say that I think as we talk both about the local level but then also the regional and state level, something like the 11-county region that Chris is managing, I think one of the potential advantages when you have a network of weed management areas or SISMAs is that not only do you have that local long-term planning coordination in place, but that at a landscape level, those groups form, a contiguous larger group that can then also work together. So that if you have landscape level goals to stop the leading edge of a particular invasive species that's spreading, or you're really trying to coordinate early detection, rapid response on the ground across a large region, then you not only have that local coordination, but you have the potential for having the coordinated network across the broader region and statewide and eventually maybe nationally as well. So I think it's really the building block unit at the local level.
Thanks, Doug. And Susan, from your perspective, having listened to some of these other presentations and conversations we've had in the past, your thought process on your partnership with the work you're doing right now versus trying to formalize that through a cooperative weed management area?
Well, I think that we are looking at the fact that we have this great partnership currently, and it is working well informally. I guess I anticipate that at some point we're going to be wanting to formalize it and expand. But what's been tried in the past is there's been some folks that have wanted to start a CWMA, and there wasn't that good underpinning of successful projects to help cement the group and partnership. So I think what we're really doing is we're laying the foundation for a group that works well together and can find some common goals and strategize on who can share what. And then I think once we've developed this for a couple of years, we may say, hey, now it's time to launch the CWMA. But doing it in reverse didn't seem so successful, at least in our area. Does that make sense?
No, it did, and I think that's probably a similar story to some of the SISMAs and CWMAs that are being represented on the web as well as here. And so we have some follow-up questions on the web, then I'm going to hand the microphone to Dave.
Okay, we have from David Chang. He says, comment that I'm a county CWMA coordinator, Santa Barbara County, California. Local administration is much more effective, attentive to local needs. Statewide coalition has disappeared with budget cuts, but may need to be reinvigorated by counties with dedicated CWMA coordinators. And then a second question along those lines, or from Chuck Magini, question for whomever. What have you found as an effective means to ID and prioritize work projects within a CWMA? Something based on highest priority invasives, keeping key ecological areas free of invasives, or a combination?
Do you want to jump on that one? So how do you prioritize your projects? And I think both Kate and Chris have talked about how their projects are, they're project-based, right? So the funding comes from a project-based, and so is it prioritized by whoever has the money, or do you have some thought process about the money you go after because of the priorities? And I'm not sure if that's getting at his, but, he's talking about, are you trying to keep one area clear, weed-free, and nothing coming in? How do you prioritize it and then get the move forward?
This is Chris here. I would say one of our biggest efforts would be looking at our high-quality natural areas and identifying what's threatening those natural areas as being the priority control for us. And the second would be new species moving in, early detection events. And so we prioritize probably mostly on chance of success. We're not going to go out and spend a lot of money on something that may not be very successful. And then honestly, what we can get funds for.
I work with a lot of CWMAs around the Midwest, and I think it really varies from place to place. What I think seems to work best, I hate to keep going back to the plan, is if you have a strategic plan, you know all the things you want to do, and then you figure out where your opportunities are for the year. Where can you get money? What can you accomplish easily? What can you get done? And those tend to usually become the priorities. And often if there is a new invasive species that's going to become a priority, people are going to find the money and the time to get something done if it really seems like an imminent threat. But having a plan in place allows you to prioritize much more easily than just sitting around and talking about it and trying to figure out whose pet project is going to rise to the top.
No, and I agree with all your comments. Pretty much, if you got the funding for it, you run with that project. If it's going to affect the T&E species, you basically prioritize those over one that's not going to affect any T&E species. So, threatened and endangered species.
Chuck, do you want to comment on the CW? So Georgia has a focus on Kogan grass.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I think that one of the things we've seen is CWMAs have formed where there's a need. And in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, there are statewide Kogan grass CWMAs. And so, it's kind of an interesting model to look at because instead of being one county or being a few counties, it's, a statewide management area, but that statewide management area is focused primarily on one species. And I think, I think in all three of those cases, there's a formal MOU signed between all the agencies, and they're all working, together, as much as possible to work on one specific species. And I think that is a model that sometimes, the size of a CWMA, where it might sometimes need to be one county, other times, it may lend itself to be a statewide organization.
In kind of a similar way, in California, there are 14 counties in the Sierra Nevada region that have banded together to try to stop yellow star thistle from moving up in elevation from the Central Valley. And they coordinated surveying along roads to find where the leading edge of the population is, and then coordinated across all the WMAs in those 14 counties to have basically a leading edge program to stop it from climbing higher.
This is Al Tasker, and I wanted to explore that idea just a little more because I've tried to encourage people not to do single topics if they could help it, that I felt there was more power in going after more than one target. But I'd like to get a little feedback on what people think of. I don't know that there's one answer that fits every situation.
And for those of you on the web, if you have responses to that too, on having a single focus within your partnership or multiple focus, please send those into the chat, Christina Serbizov-King, and then I'm going to, who wants to try to start on that one first?
I don't think there's really one right way to go about it. Some CWMAs have great success with tackling a particular species. For instance, the Northwoods CWMA in northern Wisconsin, they started out as a group who was focused on leafy spurge control. And that partnership was so successful that they've then moved on to a variety of other things. They've made homeowners guides for how to control and identify Japanese knotweed and some other problem species up there. They've been working with their county road departments on timing of mowing efforts so they're not spreading seeds, all kinds of local education efforts. And so often if you focus on a single species and it's a good partnership, that'll kind of turn itself into something more long-term and comprehensive. So my personal opinion is start with what you can get people excited about, you can get people on board with doing, and you can have success to show the value of the partnership, and it'll carry on from there.
Susan, do you have a thought about that? Is that your strategy with working on the parsnip control to get a single species success?
Well, I think that kind of echoes how we've been approaching it, is thinking, let's make sure that we can get everybody on board first. We all agree that this is an issue, and we're ready to bundle our species together and, start working on things outside of that particular species-specific approach and try and look at systems approaches. At least I am. I think there's definitely a growing curve, and getting comfortable with one another seems to be an important first step.
And I think going back to the species level thing, it's interesting because, in Georgia specifically, this was a topic that a bunch of different groups and a bunch of different agencies could come together on. And although there are other statewide initiatives for invasive plants and invasive species, the issue of cogon grass brought in some partners that we otherwise wouldn't bring in. And I think that in Florida, as an example, where we showed the map showing all the different SISMA spread out across the state, where a statewide meeting might get 100 people for a Florida EPSI meeting, when the SISMA started around the Tampa area, there were 50 people that came to the first planning meeting for that. So there is sometimes the ownership level and the engagement at the local level. For example, the EdMAPS program in Florida is the most successful of anywhere because the local CWMAs have taken ownership, and it's very similar to Damon's satellites for the Texas Invaders program. When people organize locally around mapping invasive species, around control of invasive species, they take a lot more ownership and they're a lot more engaged. And I think, going back to what we mentioned from the beginning, if we really want to do successful EDRR, doing it on the very local level is always the first step.
All right, so I'm keeping an eye on the time. We've got 20 more minutes here, and I'd like to bring this conversation. We're sort of starting backwards on the logical network that we had proposed up here from the local level, and now thinking at a state level, and Chuck just gave me a perfect segue to that about, so if we go to Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council Symposium, we do have a SISMA workshop there every year in Florida, and we don't get all the SISMA membership, right, but we get a representation. So we generally get the majority of our SISMAs represented there. And so what is that role of regional coordination? How does that allow a SISMA or a local grassroots partnership to be stronger if they have some voice, they're represented at a statewide level? And I know you don't have any SISMAs yet in Texas, but there's a lot of work going on in Texas. So can you think about that regional coordination?
Yeah, definitely. From the state perspective, there's really there's two things going on. One are the invasive councils that are in the state, and those are those multi-agency councils that I mentioned, the DNR, the Parks and Wildlife, the Ag Department. And very often that's just a committee of people who are meeting specifically to coordinate their state agency efforts for control and management and to seek federal funding. So I don't think that would be a really good home for the SISMAs, because there's really not an opportunity to do those workshops. I like the idea of the multi-stakeholder groups, the EPSIs, the IPSIs, and the WHATSIs being the parent organizations for training SISMAs, for SISMAs and CWNAs doing presentations at their meetings. The trouble is every state doesn't have one of those yet. And so there are, I'm sure, states that have lots of CWMAs that don't have a multi-stakeholder group that meets regularly like that.
So for those of you out in the web and in the room, let's think about that. Are you a SISMA or CWMA without a parent somewhere out there in the world, so you don't have a regional coordination to kind of talk up to or talk amongst yourselves? And so I'm going to, and in Texas, you actually do have the Texas Invasive Plant Council, and there's pretty good coverages with IPSIs and EPSIs and WHOSIs, but it's not complete, and we can discuss whether or not that is something that's needed.
I'm Leo Donoval, the Pennsylvania Invasive Species Council Coordinator out of the Department of Agriculture. I'm actually interested in some comments you just made, Damon, about maybe a coordinated effort among volunteer groups at a SISMA level or something. How would you see that being interwoven into what an invasive species council does at the state level?
Some thought process there. I don't know if anyone in the room or online is from New York, but I know New York has some direct connection. And Doug, you might be able to speak to that too from California. So maybe I'll just do that. Doug, you want to talk about that from a California Invasive Species Council connection?
I can. David's there in the room as well. I heard him.
David, do you want to talk about it? Okay. He's deferring to you.
Okay. Well, I think there are great roles for both invasive species councils at the state level, and for NGOs like an invasive plant council. I think ideally, if a state invasive species council is active and has all the stakeholders present, either through the council itself or through an advisory committee, as we have in California, then that's a perfect nexus for coordination of invasive species activities. However, in California, we're at a pretty high policy level. So when it gets down to setting local, regional, and state priorities for things like invasive plant eradication or surveillance targets, that is something that I think the WMAs and the SISMAs, they have the expertise, but they do need to coordinate on that. And that's, if you have funding for your IPSI or your EPSI, then perhaps you have the capacity to help facilitate that coordination. But I think funding is going to be a key limiting factor there.
Funding and/or some body and with the will and time within their day job to do the coordination, right?
Correct. Very, very much as Chris described for the river-to-river CWMA, having that focal person, leverages a ton. And I think same way with coordinating the actions of multiple CWMAs at a regional or state level, that having a person or persons paid to actually pay attention to that is really what can make the whole thing go.
Right, and so we're talking now, thinking about regional level of coordination, and the models that we've talked about are state invasive species councils or state invasive species exotic pest plant councils or invasive plant councils. We also have something like the Midwest Invasive Plant Network out in West. So there's these different regional models that we have out there. So as a collective group here, thinking about how those regional partnerships help facilitate the grassroots efforts as well.
I think that one thing, this is Al Tasker again, is I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all model. Maryland has an invasive species council, which is informal. We don't have a charter. We're just both public and private and government and all taxa, and we just meet together every other month and try to discuss issues. And we do projects. But I was in a Southern Plant Board meeting, and Virginia came in and was just weeping and wailing because the governor didn't sign their charter. And I said, why do you have to have a charter to have an invasive species council? You don't need a charter. You just meet together.
And that's a great point. I have to point out in Florida, we don't have an invasive species council, even though Damon listed it there, but it wasn't on the map. And so the map's more up to date than his list was. But we do have a Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, and we do have the Florida Invasive Species Partnership, and those two entities work together well, and we're not redundant. So the partnership exists only to facilitate, to kind of work as an umbrella over the SISMAs in Florida, and to work with those private land incentive programs that can help private landowners address invasive species on their lands. Other than that, we work hand in glove with the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, using their symposium for our annual SISMA workshop, the expertise, the weed list that comes out of the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. There's just a lot of synergy between those groups, but neither the Florida Invasive Species Partnership has no charter. We actually do have a resolution that basically says we all think weeds are bad and invasive species are bad, and DOT agrees to this, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agrees to this. We have 15 federal, state, and nonprofit organizations all agreeing that the invasive species are messing with each of our missions, and therefore it makes sense that we work together. And as a quote from one lawyer with one of those organizations said, yeah, that's sufficiently namby-pamby, we can sign it. Like, there's no legal teeth to it, so we'll sign it. Sure, no problem. We even got the Corps to sign it, I think.
Chris, do you, if memory serves, there is a central agency within the state of Florida that has responsibility for invasive species. Is that correct?
Well, there's a lot of state agencies, and all the state agencies that own and manage land have some level of authority. So Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, through forestry owns and manages lands, but also through their noxious and invasive plant list, which actually have regulatory authority. And then the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is what you're thinking of, in the sense that they have had the funding for years, even though that's for aquatic and terrestrial plants that they're giving to different public conservation lands in Florida. But even our Department of Environmental Protection owns and manages lands. So there's really not one central state agency that does that, except that the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, through their invasive plant management section, does phenomenal work for our state through their aquatic and terrestrial programs.
Yes, Damon, I was just going to comment on Al's comment and clarify that the invasive species councils usually consist of multi-state agencies, except when they don't. And yeah, right. They're often modeled after the National Invasive Species Council, except when they're not.
One thing I wanted to bring up, we're talking about kind of regional coordination of local groups, and we kind of went to a state level. And one thing that we dealt with way down in southern Illinois is that we're not really like the rest of the state in a lot of ways, but ecologically especially, in the sense that we're more similar and we share more issues, honestly, with Kentucky and southern Indiana and southern Ohio. And so what we've done is informally, we kind of had a series of conference calls and just worked together through the CWMAs that are set up there. It's not formalized. It's not based jurisdictionally or any kind of boundary, but we've kind of taken upon ourselves that it makes more sense for us to talk to each other. And so I probably have really close working relationships with those groups more so than others, simply because that's where we're similar. And I think that makes sense if you think about, we talk about weeds knowing no boundaries, and I guess CWMAs kind of need to know no boundaries as well.
Hi, I'm Melissa Smith from Washington State, and just to sort of play on Chris's comment, and somebody else had mentioned something about the fire cooperatives that are regional, and I've heard of teams and regional teams of striker teams for early detection and rapid response and early eradication for invasive species. And I think that it would be good to get your inputs on how you think those could be managed at a regional and multi-state level, made up of federal, state, and even regional teams.
Tony, you want to start with that one? All right, so we're talking about having a regional strike team for early detection, rapid response, and presumably you would coordinate amongst multiple SISMAs depending on what that leading edge is or what the species was.
Yeah, we've talked about all this time about using the fire model, because fire's got like a perfect model the way it's set up. I mean, the Federal Interagency Fire Group, when a fire shows up, all of a sudden, like, they have a pot of money that's set aside that everybody knows is set aside for this emergency purpose. Yeah, equipment shows up, personnel shows up, it all gets, gone, to one special account. So, I mean, everybody, it all seems to work really well with fire. But for some reason, we just can't get, we bring this up over and over again, we just can't get anybody to buy it off on, setting up the same type of system for invasive species. Is there anything that you see in the horizon that might facilitate that?
Right. Walking across.
Well, I don't want to jinx it because, as you said, we've been here before. But we are being encouraged to forward another proposal. And I think some of the models we're looking at is public-private funding for an invasive species, and at least we're calling it pilot. And so the idea would be, and what we've heard from some of our ISAC members in the past is, if the feds could fund and deal with some of the regulatory issues and the environmental review issues in the early detection part of it, then a lot of organizations think they could raise money for the rapid response part of it. And so that's what we're working towards, and I was really hoping to make an announcement at this meeting, but as you noticed, that announcement was lacking. But we are hopeful that we're moving towards that model, but we need a lot of encouragement from the state. I'm Lori Williams, Executive Director of the National Invasive Species Council. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Helmy with the U.S. Forest Service, and I serve on the steering committee for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Pulling Together initiative, which has been very successful over the years, initiating CWMAs and funding those at least for about 5 years running for most of these. But over the years, we've seen the pot dwindle, and I was wondering a couple of things, maybe a two-part question here. What efforts would there be out there to help see more federal agencies participate in that corporation-driven design? And would there be an additional opportunity to match those dollars with non-federal funding, other than the funding that comes through the match that the local CWMA initiates, but I'm talking about a higher level of corporate or other support funding? Because ultimately, there's your place to build a lot of this long-term financial support, and a place where people can rally around something like a pot where we all can dip into. But as the pot dwindles, it gets harder and harder for us to distribute funding in any viable way, and there's rules of engagement there, and certainly there's new designs around the new foundation's new strategic approach and to what they're doing.
Can I ask you one clarifying question there? So I don't know, I mean, in Florida, there's not one SISMA that doesn't have pretty much all their federal partners engaged, but maybe that's on the ground level and there's some disconnect between the people working on the ground and upper management?
There is, in some ways, yes. There are big disconnects because right now the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, and the BLM and APHIS are the only agencies left on the table. And I can remember in the early days we had state agencies at the table with money. We had the Park Service. We had lots of other federal agencies participating. DOD, I think. Where's Pete? He used to be there. And so you had a big change there for some reason on a national level. But locally, that never happened. We still had those interconnections, those people chipping in. In fact, our Forest Service new policy is saying, encouraging the forests to participate in and support financially those efforts.
Yeah, in the Everglades area, we've gone to basically the Everglades Council, trying to and they've all agreed that you guys need funding. I mean, early detection rapid response funding would be great if you could get it, but we just don't have anything to give to you. And so we've got, even though everybody thinks it's a great idea, we haven't got anything. So we've gotten really frustrated. So lately we've been trying to try to come up with even private donations. So our last attempt is we're trying to set up a nonprofit organization. We're going to try to get the donation account set up through the University of Florida, where maybe we figure if since the government's not going to contribute to EDR, maybe we get some wealthy patron that hates snakes. Maybe he'll donate $100,000, and we could maybe set up it's really bad that as a federal agency that we know there's these invasive species issues that we can't address them, and we're going to have to basically go to private entities to try to get money for invasive species control.
All right. So if any of the other panelists want to address that? And Mike, did that answer your question, or do you want some further follow-on? So what can we do? And so he's specifically thinking about the National Fish and Wildlife Federation Pulling Together Initiative Foundation, thank you, Pulling Together Initiative, and what we can do to keep that funding and or increase it. Can you tell us what should we be doing to keep that money? I mean, we've all been trying to get money from them and have been using their money when they give it to us, so and been showing lots of success.
I was just trying to point out that it has been one of the originating sources for a lot of these organizations, the place where they all began in some places more so than others, but and sustained themselves. I noticed one of the slides earlier showed one of the biggest bars in the survey is sustainability. And I don't know, it's been 3 or so years ago, we did an analysis of all the past projects and all the, we had a firm involved. We went out there and contacted all these organizations, spoke with them, what's going on, how's it going, where you going from here. And sustainability was the same thing, same problem. And one of the biggest problems with that is where the organization didn't have a paid leader, like Chris is talking about, a paid coordinator, it was usually driven by this passionate person, an individual who just kept it alive. And then, the python got him, and that was the end of the story. But so we were trying to figure, okay, how do we reinvigorate this? How do we make this more sustainable so it isn't dependent upon just passion or a paid salary?
So Kate's going to say the same thing I'm going to say, and as I'm walking over, in Florida, unfortunately, we tested that model, which is we've had at least 3 SISMAs in Florida lose their passionate individuals due to layoffs. And the reason those SISMAs persisted and are very strong still today is because they had a strategic plan and a steering committee. And there was a lull, and there was a little bit of freaking out, but they're still there, and they're still being very successful.
I just wanted to comment on the state funding. You were mentioning that the state agencies were contributing to PTI much more, and just in general, we've seen really dire state budget situations, at least in the Midwest, where we've got people, positions being cut or people retiring and no rehires. So we've got fewer people doing more work and no money. I mean, my program has never had a dime of state money. It's all private and federal funding, and I'm seeing that with many of the CWMAs in my region. Not all, some are luckier than others or have better relationships with their state agencies where they can work together. But the state funds are not. I'd say they're less reliable in a lot of cases than the federal funds. And I do try to encourage people to seek out private foundation funds whenever possible, because if you can have those private funds, you have a better chance of getting government funds. If you have the government funds, you have a better chance of getting the private funds as well. So diversifying funding sources is something that we strongly advocate.
So I have to apologize here. Time just flew, right? We had 40 minutes for this panel discussion, and I just checked my clock, and I said, okay, I'm saving 10 minutes for the national piece. So we have 1 minute, and really that's negative 1 minute. But we had this last question, and this is because, we've got national invasive we've got pretty much everybody representing at least one NISAW. Is that what we called it, Damon? National Invasive Species Organization in this room. I really doubt that there wasn't one thing listed by Damon that there's not somebody in here who is familiar with, sits on some type of organization. And so what should the role of these national invasive species organizations play in the coordination of grassroots efforts? Or is there? Because yesterday we had this discussion saying it just needs to happen on the ground, and that'll create the synergy. Is there a role for some national communication? And we might just have to take a show of hands at this point, because I'm one of those moderators who really hate going over, and it's 3:02 right now. So we're asking for a show of hands online to say, do you want to have another national conversation in the fall? A webinar like this, except we won't all be sitting in this room. We'll all be able to talk on the phone if we can find somebody to give us a conference call number, because I can't afford to pay for that. And in this room, do you guys want to see a national conversation continue about how we can kind of create some synergy out of these grassroots efforts? And so I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Yes for national coordination. I'm going to have some follow-up questions, because there's some hesitant hands going, well, maybe. So now put your hands down. Does anybody, just a shout out, who could lead that effort? We are a ragtag band of group up here who are marching along year to year. We know each other pretty well, but maybe we're forgetting some folks, right? Is there an organization or some way just for this first year, between now and NISAW 2013, how do we make sure that we're not leaving folks out when we coordinate a national conversation in the fall? Any ideas? And David, are we getting pretty much yeses here that we want to have this national conversation in the fall?
Stosh Burgel, National Invasive Species Council. You mentioned you had 140 people listening into this, which I would think would be great. And I don't know all the ways that you disseminated the information for this. And there might not be one sort of single way to get the information out. But I think, sort of the combination of the various networks, and I guess you call them NISAWs, could start to get the word out, and maybe that's the best place to start.
This is Ann Gibbs. I guess I also have a question about what the goal is, because you've sort of said, should somebody do this, and I'm not sure what they do.
So, yes. Yes. So what would the goal of a national conversation be? And given the time right now, I might have to say that that could be the purpose of our fall call, since it seems like everybody thought maybe that would be a good idea. And between now and that fall point, maybe we can lean on the National Invasive Species Council to help us figure out how to set that up, much like you helped set up the National Invasive Species Awareness Week. And I'm kind of putting Lori and Stash on the spot here. Maybe Mike, because he was kind enough to set up this room for us and provide us internet. And believe it or not, internet costs money when you want to have a call like this. So, yes, we want to continue national conversation. Yes, we're going to try to do it sooner than next year at NISAW, so sometime in the fall. The band up here we'll start the conversation with the National Invasive Species Council at this point, but not leaving out any of those National Invasive Species organizations. And we can give you the whole list of every listserv and every blog that we posted this on to get the 140 people. So thank you very much for participating. Thanks everybody who's on the web. And that concludes our session.
Thank you, everybody.